Okay, we're going to go through a quick crash course of Mathematica, and I'm going to give you just the commands you need to know to be able to solve some problems in this chapter. If you want to go more in depth, you can go on the welcome screen and do Learn with Guided Examples, which will give you a little bit more detail about some of the commands we're going to go over. If it goes fast at any time, you can, of course, pause the podcast, and I suggest that you try the examples with me as I go over some of these. Okay, the most basic thing you need to be able to do is plot. The command for that, surprisingly enough, is plot. Notice in Mathematica, when you call on a function, you need to type it in capital. If I were just to type plot in lowercase, it stays blue, which is Mathematica's way of saying you did something wrong or you're not complete yet. So plot, it turns black, which tells you you're good. Once you call in a command in Mathematica, what you want it to do needs to be put in brackets. So in this case, let's say I want to plot just a simple parabola. So we're just going to ask Mathematica to plot x squared. One other thing I need to tell it is what domain or what values of x I want it to plug in order to plot this. So I can put comma, and the domain is going to go in curly brackets. First thing I need to tell Mathematica is which variable. So in this case, x, there's only one variable. I need to give it a lower bound, so we'll just go from -3 to 3. Okay, at this point, if you just hit enter, notice it just goes to the next line. What Mathematica actually needs you to do to execute the command is go shift, hold down the shift key, and then enter. So if I hit shift enter, then you can see the plot right there. It's a parabola from -3 to 3. So that's the basic command. One of the things you can play around with, by the way, is if you want more options, you can hover over the command, and then if you hit F1, it will give you a help menu with all sorts of different examples. So here's some examples of, for example, plotting multiple graphs. So how do you do that? Here's examples with shading. You can go into options, and each one of these you can look at certain examples. So for example, if I want to change the axis style, I can go here and you can see the commands to make the axis dashed or different colors, things like that. So let's look at a couple options maybe that you may want to use. One of the most basic ones I usually use is the option plot range. Plot range will tell Mathematica I want to look from at this window. And what you need to do next to indicate what the plot range is dash arrow. Okay, so one more time, dash arrow, and it'll turn into an arrow. Again, the plot range you need to put in brackets, curly brackets. So in this case, I'm going to tell it x and then y. Okay, so the formatting here will become clear as I'm finished. So let's say I want to plot it from -3 to 3 in the x coordinate. And for the y, let's say I want to go from -9 to, or let's go -4 to 9. Okay, notice you don't need to tell it it's x and y. Mathematica understands that you're going in the horizontal direction first, then the vertical direction, and there's a comma separating it out. So if I hit shift enter, what you'll notice is now I can play around with what I see from -3 to 3 and from 9 to -4. Another option, just to differentiate different graphs might be what's called plot style. Again, you need dash arrow, and you can tell it, for example, red. I want the line instead of blue to be red, and I want it to be thick. Shift enter, and there you have a thick and red graph instead of the usual thin blue one. But again, you can hit F1 and kind of see what the different formats and the ways you can play around with this. In this chapter, we're dealing mainly with discrete functions, so functions that only exist at n equals 1, 2, 3, 4 integers, and not continuous functions. So we want to plot kind of a different plot. So instead of plot, we're actually going to use the command discrete plot. Discrete plot is the same thing, except for it's only going to plug in integer values. Again, we need the brackets, and we can put in any function we want. In this case, I'll just go with n over 1 minus 2n. And as with plot, I need to tell it the variable n is going to go from 1 to, say, 10. And if I hit shift enter, then you can see the plot right there, the discrete plot of this sequence. And you can determine whether it's monotonic, whether it's bounded, those sort of things. You can play around with it a little bit more, maybe do something a little more interesting. Sometimes you need to put a times in between. When in doubt, I would always put a times in between. You can kind of see what happens, or I can take this out further to, say, 100, and you can see that it's not monotonic, but it does seem sort of bounded.